بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أعزائي طلبة وطالبات شهادة الثانوية العامة قسم رياضة لغات، أهلا بكم. اليوم سنتطرق إلى درس جديد في الهندسة الفراغية، هو بعنوان الضرب الاتجاهي في الفراغ. طبعا احنا عارفين في فرق بين الضرب القياسي والضرب الاتجاهي. Welcome my dear student in our math program for second 3. Today we are taking new lesson in solid geometry. It's called vector product in space. My dear student, look at introduction about vector product in space. My dear student, if we have two vectors A and B vector, between them angle theta, then A vector cross B vector equal norm A, norm B sine theta. Remember, my dear student, A scalar product B, norm A, norm B cosine theta. But A vector cross by B vector means vector product norm the first, norm the second times sine angle between them. My dear student, if we have A and B are non-zero vectors, is the measure of the smaller angle between them, theta angle between them. Look at, we have two directions. Look at the first, when the curved fingers of the right hand, the direction of rotation from A and B cross the smaller angle between them, across the smaller angle. Thumbs show the direction of the vector C. Remark, my dear student, if we have A and B two vectors none equals 0, theta is measure of smaller angle between them. What you deduce? A cross B equals negative B cross A. But A dot B equals B dot A. This the first is vector product, second is scalar product. Vector product A cross B equal negative V cross A, but the scalar product A dot B equal B dot A. Norm A cross B equals norm A, norm B, sine angle between them, sine theta. Sine theta equals what? Norm A cross B over norm A, norm B. The unit vector in direction of A cross B is C vector. C vector is A vector cross B vector over norm A vector cross B vector. By using norm A, B vector, norm first, norm the second, sine angle between them, this is if A, B, and C are three non-zero vector and A vector cross B vector equals A vector cross C vector. What you deduce? Excellent student, B vector equals C vector. Then it is necessary, not necessary that B vector equals C vector. If you, my dear student, if you find a vector cross B vector equals A vector cross C vector, then it is not necessary that B vector equals C vector. May be equal, may be not equal. Not necessary that two vectors are equal. Properties of the vector product of two vectors. If we have two vectors A and B, theta angle between them, what you deduce? My dear student, the first A cross B, negative V cross A. Not commutative. Why? Because if the product vector product A cross B equal B cross A is commutative. But In this case, a vector cross b vector equal negative v vector cross a vector or not commutative property. A vector cross bracket contains b vector plus c vector equals a vector cross b vector plus a vector cross c vector, or distribute product vector among adding of two vectors. This is called distribution property. B vector plus C vector inside bracket cross a vector equals what? B vector cross a vector plus C vector cross a vector. Also, Ka vector cross B vector equal A vector cross Kb vector equal K multiply A vector cross B vector. K belongs to R, real numbers. And we deduce A vector cross A vector equal B vector cross B vector equal 0 vector, where theta angle equals 0. Angle between same vector is 0. 0 why? Because if we have A vector equal 3, 2, 1, if we find a vector cross B vector equal norm the first, norm the second, sine angle between them, 0. Sine theta or sine 0 equals 0. Therefore, A vector cross B cross itself equal 0 vector. If A vector cross B vector equals 0, we deduce that a vector parallel B vector or one of them or both equal 0. A vector cross A B vector equals 0. If A vector cross B vector equals 0, then we deduce A vector parallel to B vector or one of them is 0 vector. Deduce, my dear student, we have two vectors are parallel if one of them equals 0 or A cross B vector equals 0. Mark. Vector product of the fundamental vector of right hand system. If I, J, K set of right hand system, look at I dot I equals J dot J, I cross I equal J cross J equal K cross K equals what? 0 vector. Remember, my dear student, I unit vector in x-axis, J unit vector in y-axis, K unit vector in z-axis. I cross I equals 0. Also J cross J equals 0 equals K cross K also equals 0. I cross J equals K vector, but J cross K equal what? I vector. K cross J equal I vector. But my dear student, look at in the opposite figure, J cross I equal negative K. Look at the direction. J cross I equal negative I dot J. I cross J equal K, negative K. Therefore, we deduce that, my dear student, J cross I equal negative I cross J. I cross J equal K equal negative K. Also, K cross J equal what? Negative I. And I cross K equals negative J vector. In Cartesian form, we can put a vector has three components: ax, ay, az. B vector bx, by, bz are two non-zero vector. We have two vectors in Cartesian form. Then a vector cross b vector, my dear student. axi plus ayj plus azk cross bxi byj bzk equals what? ay bz minus az by in I vector, z bx minus a x bz j vector plus x by minus ay bx k vector by using determinant. A vector cross b vector, look at my dear student by using determinant ijk ax ay az bx by bz. Then we have three components in I, j, and in k by using determinant. Special cases. If a vector ax, ay, b vector bx, by in xy plane, then we deduce that a vector cross b vector by using ijk. Therefore, the value of vector a cross vector b equals what? ax by minus ay bx in k vector. Why? Because component in I vector equals 0, also in j vector equals 0. In this case, we have one component in k vector. Ax by using determinant ax by minus a y bx in direction k vector. Example. If a vector, norm a vector equal 5, norm b vector equals 8, theta equals 30 degrees, find a vector cross b vector norm of them. Look at my dear student. Norm a vector cross b vector equals norm a times norm b sine angle between them by using the rule. Substitution about norm a, norm b, sine angle them equals 20. Another example. If norm a cross b equals 35 root 3 c vector, norm a equals 14, also norm b equals 5, find measure of the angle between the two vectors a and b vector. Solution. Look at sine theta equals norm a cross b over norm a, norm b. By using substitution, norm a cross b equals 35 root 3 over norm a times norm b, 14 times 5. Answer is root 3 over 2. What is the angle? My dear student, what is the angle? It's a measure or it's sine root 3 over 2 x and student. Theta equal shift sine root 3 over 2 equals 60 degrees or 120 degrees. Why? Why or 120 degrees? My dear student, in this case, we have sine theta equals root 3 over 2 is positive. Angle is positive or sine is positive in first and second quad. First quad angle equals 60. Second quad 180 minus 60 equals 120. Therefore, sine theta equal root 3 over 2. We deduce that theta equals 60 degrees or 120 degrees. Another example. A vector equals its component 1 to 1. B vector by using fundamental vectors 3i plus j plus 2k vector. Find number 1 A vector cross B vector, number 2 B vector cross A vector, and what you deduce. Number 3, find unit vector perpendicular to each of two vectors A vector and B vector. Solution. Number 1, A vector cross B vector. My dear student, what is the rule? By using determinant. Why use determinant in this case? We have not angle between them. My dear student, we solve a vector cross B vector by two methods. The first method, if we have angle between them. Therefore, a vector cross B vector equal norm A times norm B sine angle between them. But if we have A vector and B vector and don't have angle between them, use determinant. Determinant IJK, first vector A, its component 1, 2, 1, component B 3, 1, 2. By using determinant 2 times 2 minus 1 times 1 in I vector minus inside bracket 1 times 2 minus 3 times 1 in J vector plus inside bracket 1 times 1 negative 3 times 2 in K vector. Answer is negative 3I plus J negative 2K. The first required. Number 2. B vector cross A vector by using the same method determined, but in this case we put component of the B vector before component of the A vector. Therefore, answer is negative 3I vector negative J vector plus 5K vector. What you deduce? Excellent student. A vector cross B vector equal negative V vector cross A vector. Number 3. Unit vector perpendicular to each of two vectors A and B vector. Look at my dear student. Unit vector A vector cross B vector over norm A vector cross B vector, or A vector cross B vector, B vector cross A vector over norm B vector cross A vector. What is the required? The perpendicular vector of A and B. Equal positive or negative 3 over square root 35 in I plus 1 over square root 35 in J vector plus 1 over square root 35 in K vector. Remember, my dear student, A vector cross B vector equals 3I plus J plus K. But norm of A cross B equals square root 35. Parallelism of two vectors. Now we are translate to important title is called parallelism of two vectors. If A and B are two non-zero vectors and A vector cross B vector equals 0 vector, then we deduce that A vector parallel B vector and vice versa. What you mean vice versa? A vector, if A vector parallel B vector, we deduce that A vector cross B vector equals 0 vector. By using the rule, A vector cross B vector equals norm A, norm B sine angle between them. There is no angle between A vector and B vector. Why? Because two vectors are parallel. Then we deduce that if two vectors are parallel, then the product of them equals 0. And we deduce that component of AX over BX equal AY over BY equal AZ over BZ. If A vector parallel B vector, then AX over BX equal AY over BY equal AZ over BZ. This important remark: if we have two vectors are parallel, we deduce that AX over BX equals AY over BY equal AZ over BZ. Then A vector parallel B vector and vice versa. Example: if A vector equal 5i minus 4j plus mk and B vector 6i plus nj negative 12k, and A vector parallel B vector, find h, k, n and m. My dear student, look at the solution. A vector parallel B vector means AX over BX equals AY over BY equals what? Excellent student, AZ over BZ. By using substitution, 5 over 6 equals negative 4 over n equals m over negative 12. By using cross multiplication, n equals negative 4.8, m equals negative 10. Why? Because 5 over 6 must be equals m over negative 12. By using cross multiplication, we find the value of m. 5 times negative 12 over 6 equals negative 10. Then n equals negative 4.8 and m equals negative 10. My dear student, by the end of the lesson, we know that if we have two vectors are parallel, as example, A vector parallel B vector, we deduce that component of AX over AY, component of AX over BX equals AY over BY equals Z over BZ. And we deduce that if we have two vectors are parallel. What you mean? Two vectors are parallel, we deduce that angle between them equals 0. And product vectors, when find A vector cross B vector, we have two methods. The first method, if we have angle between them. What is the rule? A vector cross B vector equals norm A times norm B sine angle between them. And remember, my dear student, A vector cross B vector not equals B vector cross A vector. Why? Because we deduce that A vector cross B vector equals negative B vector cross A vector. And remember, my dear student, A vector dot B vector equal B vector dot A vector, or scalar product. Scalar product of two vectors are good, commutative, but A vector cross B vector not commutative with B vector cross A vector. My dear student, the second method to calculate A vector cross B vector by using determinant. We use determinant has 3 row and 3 column. The first row ijk, and put component of the first vector of the second row, component of the second vector in third row, and by using solution of the determinant to find the value of A cross B vector. My dear student, I am very happy to spend such time with you. Thank you.